Welcome to the legal series on startup formation with Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs United. We unite the Stanford startup community in innovation centers beyond California with regular remote programming. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sheila Proeve, co-president of the group, managing partner of Proeve Ventures, and a Stanford computer science alumna. We're delighted to have interest from the alumni and student communities for this legal workshop with Angel Orrantia and Emma Channing today. Please note, the speakers, Stanford University, Stanford Alumni Association, and Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs United are not your personal tax, financial, or investment advisor. This presentation is only intended to provide a general, non-exhaustive view of the covered topics and is not intended to constitute legal advice to you in your specific situation. For such advice, please consult with your own legal, tax, and financial advisors. We're delighted to welcome our expert speakers for this legal series on startup formation. Angel Orrantia is an accomplished entrepreneur, investor, and startup attorney who has served in CXO roles and advised early-stage companies. As the head of I2I Idea to IPO, Angel leverages his decades of diverse experiences as an electrical engineer, executive, and corporate attorney to provide strategic services to early and mid-stage companies, including fundraising, M&A, and IPO prep, as well as fractional general counsel services. Previously, he founded and led Vonsos Partners, a venture capital fund, after heading business development for SK Telecom's venture arm and at Applied Materials. He also counseled startups and investors at Fenwick and West. Angel earned his BS in electrical engineering from Stanford University, a JD from Notre Dame Law School, and an MBA from Carey School of Business in Arizona. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you.
Emma Channing is General Counsel of ETH Trust Incorporated and was formerly the founder and CEO of Satis Group, a blockchain advisory firm with expertise in security tokens. She regularly speaks at South by Southwest, BlockFS, NCC's Cyber Symposium, among others. She also co-founded think tank Global Blockchain Convergence and Node Women, a group to support women in fintech, blockchain, crypto, and digital assets. Previously, she led global regulatory compliance and built flexible legal approaches for cutting-edge technology firms. She earned her LLM degree from Stanford Law School and LLB LLM degrees from Durham Law School. Let's start by addressing some wider questions we received from those who've registered. What are the options for setting up a company? If you could get us started, Angel.
Yeah, so I think there's some pretty basic functions you can start with. Probably starting at the lowest end would be a sole proprietorship, which is technically not a legal structure. It's just kind of, you just start doing your own thing. Up from that, you would have the LLC, and then from LLC, I think you have the opportunity of doing an S Corp or a C Corp on top of that. And one thing that's gotten quite popular with some of my clients recently is forming a public benefit company, not a B Corp, but a public benefit company that can then be transformed into a B Corp, assuming they meet all of the qualifications.
And Emma, what are the options in the blockchain space, if they're any different?
In the blockchain space, much as the advice is the same. Generally speaking, you're looking at a C Corp. There is something called a distributed autonomous organization, which is a organization where the token holders organize the organization by voting. It's relatively new and very unwieldy, and so not something you will want to do unless you desperately want the distributed nature of a DAO.
What factors determine whether to go the route of an LLC, sole proprietorship, Delaware Corp, nonprofit, benefits corporation, or other entity?
So I would say an LLC is probably something that's appropriate for a consultant or somebody who just wants some legal protections, but they're basically going to be a sole proprietor, or they're never going to raise money. So if it's going to be a company and you never expect to bring in outside shareholders, we can get into the technicalities, but technically LLCs don't have stock. They have units, which muddies the waters, makes it very difficult to bring in investors. If you plan on raising money, and I think Emma kind of touched on this earlier, there's pretty much only one choice. You need to be a Delaware C Corp. anything other than a Delaware C Corp, and you're going to raise red flags, and your fundraise is just going to go a little bit slower.
Now, you brought up Delaware. So how do you suggest selecting jurisdictions? For instance, many do set up in Delaware. Why and how do some companies start in different states or even countries now from where they're located?
Delaware is the most widely established body of law and it's most predictable. It's, generally speaking, the most investor friendly and where most people would recommend setting up. Sometimes people choose jurisdictions for particular regulatory regimes, particularly in the blockchain space. People have often used Switzerland, but that the key thing to always bear in mind is that you govern by the jurisdiction in which you're capital raising, not the jurisdiction in which you are incorporated in. And so really the key thing to think about is that rather than anything else.
And do you have any thoughts around that as it relates to the acceleration in remote work? For instance, there are often companies that are situated actually entirely outside the United States, setting up as a Delaware C Corp or other entity in the US. How difficult is that?
It's very easy. There are companies that service that for you and will set up the forms for you.
When in the startup life cycle would you form a corporation or entity? Some founders pointed out they form one too early and then the idea flopped. When is it wise to officially set up from a legal perspective?
As soon as you're creating any value or IP, it's generally a good idea to be setting up a company.
Angel, would you have anything to add there?
I would just say that anytime you're going to take on any kind of liability as a founder, you probably want to assume that liability under some sort of corporate protection, whether it's a simple LLC or a C Corp if you plan on fundraising. But personally, I would definitely not sign anything individually if it was intended for some sort of corporate purpose.
And how long does the process of setting up usually take?
Hours, I would say, for the most part. I mean, you can make things very, very complicated, but the filing process through Delaware, literally, I did it 2 days ago. It took 30 minutes or so to do the filing, right? That's the initial setup, but there's some corporate formalities you need to do after that that will also take a couple of hours, but those are internal things that you need to do to comply with the laws, but you don't need to do those in terms of actually getting the corporation recognized by the state.
Now, LLCs, sometimes you would set those up in a different state versus Delaware. Could you comment on that?
Sure. So usually the LLCs, again, going back to the idea of using them as a corporate shield for like consultants. Ordinarily, those consultants are only going to operate in one jurisdiction or one state, in which case it makes perfect sense to have the LLC in that state. So for example, for my practice, my fundraising practice, it's a California LLC because I don't need a Delaware corporation. I'm never going to fundraise for it. It's a service business. It's almost impossible to fundraise for anyway. And two, this is where I do my business. So all my business licenses and everything else that I'm signing up for, again, I don't want to sign for those personally. I'll sign for them as an LLC. And because I reside in California, it just made logical sense to have the LLC in my home jurisdiction.
Emma, could you elaborate the setup of the company you're at, the ETH Trust Incorporated, in the jurisdiction it's in?
It's a Delaware C Corp.
And then do you need a local entity to operate in the state you're in, or is it strictly in Delaware?
It's strictly in Delaware.
Now, when forming the initial cap table, how much are you taking into consideration future cap table constraints? And how does that impact when you're setting up?
I mean, a cap table can be increased at any time, so that's a relatively flexible proposition.
What are common mistakes you see in the formation process?
Common mistakes I've seen is authorizing too much stock. In Delaware, you're taxed by how much stock you authorize. So unless, like Emma said, unless you're imminently about to go fundraising, and then kind of off of something you'd said earlier, Sheila, where somebody incorporated too early. Well, those two things usually really just matter in terms of cost. And you can minimize your costs by not authorizing too much stock until you actually need it. So the common refrain that you'll hear if you use any of the online services to incorporate is that in Delaware, you should authorize 10 million shares, which is absolutely true if you plan on fundraising very quickly, because you'll probably need those shares to entice investors to come on board. But if you're a pre-revenue company and you're probably not going to get in revenue for a couple of years, you might be better off authorizing significantly less stock now and then just increasing it when you need it by just filing a new certificate of incorporation or amending the certificate of incorporation to include the increase in stock.
What should F1 students consider when starting a company?
I don't think there's really anything different that an F1 student should be considering other than the short time period that you're in the country.
So would you also say they should consider a Delaware C Corp?
Yeah.
Depending on the nature of the business, of course.
Yeah. The same considerations apply. There's nothing specific to an F1 student that would change that.
Now, we had some questions regarding IP and cap tables from the audience, which I would encourage you to check out our previous legal series, which are recorded and shared on YouTube. I'll drop that in the chat later. And to help the audience navigate to the breakout rooms today, Angel and Emma, could each of you please highlight your sectors of expertise as related to startup formation?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that I primarily specialize in early stage company formation. So companies that are just getting started is probably my bread and butter.
In any particular sectors?
Nothing too specific. I've helped companies get started in everything from tomato production to the tech sector, but I would say that my practice is heavily skewed towards tech startups.
Emma?
I'm, again, early stage startups and primarily focused in blockchain and digital assets.
Thanks very much to both of you.